Well, thank you very much for joining us today, Dr. Saxena. Really appreciate you taking time out. We are delighted and honored to have you as part of this podcast. And we thank you for giving your written consent for the audio recording of this podcast and sharing your thoughts as somebody who's engaged in social justice research. And we welcome you for joining us from the University of Delhi. And before we get started into the formal questions, I would like to begin by acknowledging the land that I'm joining you from. I'm joining you from the unceded territory of the Secwepemc Nation, a nation of 17 bands here. And I feel privileged and honored to be able to do the work that I do on a regular basis because I have the opportunity to meet wonderful people such as yourself who strive to make the world a better place. And with that opening, I would love if you would like to just give a few comments to our listeners about who you are in terms of your positionality, your, as much or as little you would like to know to share with them about your geographical location and about yourself so that they have a profile about you before we get into the questions. Is that all right?
Yeah, sure. Thank you, Dr. Sharma, for that beginning. It looks vibrant, and I'm looking forward to the interaction. So I'm Vandana. I come from a land of heritage, which is a very old civilization, and it is this length of civilization that gives us a lot of opportunities to reflect upon the theme that we are going to talk about today. That is the being in India, and especially a place called Delhi, which is the capital of India, has been a privilege for me, which I would like to say. I belong to an illustrious institution, University of Delhi, which just completed 100 years in 2022. So it's a legacy once again, and I give a lot of credit to my institution because the opportunities that I get are extremely associated with the place where you work for. When I was approached for the podcast, I had this basic question that how would you locate me in this entire global scenario? And I was told that we went to the university website, we went to education department, and that's where. So I really respect a lot the institution and the legacy that and the kind of privilege that it gives to us. So a lot of gratitude to the university. I come from Delhi. I'm born and brought up in Delhi. And this is like one of the most multicultural city in India. Delhi has always been liked by the people in power. So across the year, across the regimes, Delhi has been a center of power. And then finally, in post-colonial India also, it was decided that Delhi will be the capital. So being there, it's again a fortunate moment to be a part of Delhi because the kind of interactions that we are able to do in the schools, the kind of exposure that we get in the university is of extreme importance. Delhi University, as I said, being a university in the capital state, it has students coming from all over the country and also internationally. So when somebody like me or anybody else like me who wants to work in the area of social justice, it becomes a ground where it becomes a very fertile ground for us to understand how things can unfold. Those minute observations that you do in your context, it gives you a lot of thought, it gives you a lot of process. So that's where I am located at this moment. I also take a minute because that's tradition for me to do, that I always start any of the discussions of this kind or presentations by paying my gratitude to my family and my parents and my teachers. And of course, my students, because I think whatever positioning you come at, there's a lot of contribution of all these people who are there in your life. In this context of my professional acumen, I think I give a lot of respect and gratitude to my teachers and my students, both of them have been extremely critical in this journey. I would like to take the name of my PhD supervisor, Professor Krishna Moitra, under which I have worked and nurtured my thoughts. The kind of, the kind of abilities that you get working with somebody is also of extreme importance when you're working in that area. The kind of professional ethics that a person instills in you is important. One more point is that I would like to report no conflict of interest here, because that's important for us to understand. When we talk about social justice, I might be citing examples, cases, but these are all for my own purpose of analysis. So I personally and professionally report no conflict of interest in this discussion that we're going to take ahead with. Everything here is based on my own analysis and my understanding of the situations. Yeah, thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you so very much for that opening positionality statement. It is with such grace and humility that you speak of all those who have brought you forward to the work and the position you are in now. It's wonderful to hear that, and I very much appreciate it. It's a great deal to your own character as well. So thank you very much for starting that way. So we'll just dive right into the questions. So, and you have a copy of them as well. So we'll go with question number one, if you're okay. Question number one is, how do you understand social justice in your discipline as a senior faculty member?
So I come from the discipline of education, currently working over there. But I've also had a master's in physics. So if I kind of, think about how the kind of values that I have kind of instituted in me, a large part of it goes to physics, which has provided me with those kind of thinking skills and processor skills. So when I talk about my discipline, when I talk about where I come from, is education, is how I identify myself to be. But the idea of social justice or any other premise will have the intersectionality across both the disciplines that is critical for me. I think social justice in the field of education, to begin with, is about accessibility. So in my context, I would give a lot of leverage to accessibility. Are people able to access the system or not? That is one of the primary criteria. And next one would be those who access. Do they get equal opportunities to learn? Or is there some kind of, a systemic discrimination due to which they do not get those learning experiences? And the third part of that would be whether the system lets them, I want to talk about the system, whether the system let them grow to their fullest potential, whether all those kind of facilities are there, or do they have to drop out after some time because of any situation, because of any reason? And when we talk about people coming to the system, being able to stay there and being able to progress in that, it is not only the education scenario which is important, it is also getting into an interactive mode with community structure. See, education to begin with would be like in the neighborhood spaces. So schools are in the neighborhood spaces, and every neighborhood has a community structure. So that community structure constantly influences the case of what is happening in the school and how the children who are coming from the neighborhood, they interact or they get an opportunity in that particular system. So that's a very important and critical part for me when we talk about social justice vis-a-vis education. So that accessibility, retention, and progression, these are the three very important words for me. That how we are able to create that enabling learning environments is of significance. See, when we talk about this, people might like to get into a discussion about marginalization. People might like to say that, there have been communities or children who are marginalized. It is a fact. We don't want to deny that. But all the children who are sitting in a classroom, say the Indian classrooms are a little heavy. They might go to around 40 kids in the same room. So when we're talking about this 40 children in the classroom, each of these child requires a space for himself or herself. They want to be respected in that scenario. They want to be heard in that scenario, no matter how small the child is, the age. It's irrespective of the age that they want to be heard. They want to connect, they want to communicate. So that opportunity needs to be provided to every child. And that is where I say it's the social justice is about bringing up the society, and everybody who is a part of the society should have that opportunity to move on. If we want a change, so there are social discriminations. Nobody can deny this, nobody should deny this. Because if we deny that on any premise, we are taking away a lot of opportunity to build a system which can be better for everyone. So there are marginalizations. Somehow down the line, we are only telling people who are marginalized to buck up. Come on, pull up your socks, you can do this, you can do this. That marginalization may be on any account. It could be gender, it could be your social identity, it could be a social class, it can be any of these factors. So somewhere down the line, it looks like that it is the responsibility of those who are disadvantaged to buckle up. Whereas if we want to talk about a social structure needs to revise itself as a whole. Everybody needs to learn to coexist. So everyone needs to know that. If I take a very popular example of gender, and I take gender in a polarity of men and women, which we don't agree with, but let's talk about gender with a polarity. If the women is being told that, you can buckle up, you can fight out, you should have your own ways, go ahead with that. But a woman, then when she gets onto her way, if she doesn't get a man, if she doesn't get a family around her who can handle this empowered women now, the women empowerment goes to drains. So we want to set up a system, and that system requires everybody to be thinking differently as what they're thinking earlier. And school looks like a great place, and that is where I want to connect it to my earlier comments. School looks like a great place if children are heard, if children can communicate. That, and the younger they are, better it is. We can just kind of tell them that, okay, they can negotiate, they can reflect upon, we can give them those small episodes of, so there is a point of microaggression that we're going to deal with later. But I think that micro connecting series is something which is very, very important right from the very beginning of the age. So I would like to place it, social justice, in the context of the social surroundings. And I would like to say that it is a responsibility of everyone to revisit how they are conducting and working onto themselves to be able to create that I would say a harmonious society, a setup where more empowering than the challenging for people. Yeah. I would rather like to use the word threatening for people, not challenging. Yeah.
All right, wonderful. Thank you very much, Dr. Saxena. So just to make sure that I've captured all your thoughts. So you define social justice in the context of the social structures in which students find themselves. So for example, the neighborhood which students come from also is reflected within the schooling environment because they coexist and they need to be able to acknowledge each other's existence in order to move forward. Is that
Yeah.
correct? Okay.
That's right.
And
But
you-
I want to add, I want to add a point to it, Dr. Sharma, that in higher education context, it is not only the neighborhood. So like, for example, if I talk about an undergrad student in Delhi University, this student might have traveled some miles, some thousand of miles to come over to that place. So the idea of neighborhood is very prevalent when we talk about the school education. But the idea of neighborhood gets redefined as the students grow and they come to higher education. So neighborhood is not always the community, the social community where you're living, but as you grow in education, as you go to your tertiary level, your neighborhood also gets redefined, your community gets redefined, because you may find yourself totally in a place where there is nobody from your socio-cultural background. So the idea of community is constantly redefining when we are getting onto that. And for the professionals, also the same thing is happening. If you're working in the same area, in your same state, it's a different community. But the moment you move out of your neighborhood community, your socio-cultural setups, you move to another setup. There is the community words gets redefined now. So community and neighborhood are something which are defined contextually with regard to where a person is. So I just wanted to make that clear.
So I'm going to connect both of your ideas of community and neighborhood and accessibility. And I want to see if I've understood this correctly. So when I'm thinking alongside you about the mandatory education that is publicly required in India of children, the people who have access to education all of a sudden look very different from those who are entering into post-secondary spaces. So the matter of accessibility changes. And now you've spoken about neighborhoods in the context of school-age children, and that has a certain impact on how they view the world and their role in their society within the larger social structure. But if you put that in juxtaposition with somebody who's had the opportunity and the privilege and maybe the financial stability to go into a post-secondary space and has traveled the world or has switched from state to state and has a larger pool to draw upon to understand what community relations are, they have a more nuanced and in-depth, complex understanding of social justice. And then you mentioned that we need to live in a coexisting, harmonious society. So how do we bring together the large gap between the mandated public education and those who have attended post-secondary spaces and have a much larger and vast understanding of social justice issues, living together in a harmonious state? Because it seems as though that in itself is a concern. There's a large gap between those who attend mandatory school and those who attend post-secondary spaces. There is a different definition operating in terms of accessibility in both of those sections, if you want to call it, in audiences. And there's also a different understanding of the nuance and complex notion of social justice education. Do you care to comment any further on that?
I think that's an interesting direction to take the conversation to, because, and I want to make a small comment here with regard to education system of India. So, in your neighborhood, people living in the same neighborhood have access to different types of schools. So there are public schools, there are private schools, and people have that opportunity to move from one place to another. They can choose. Many a number of times parents relocate themselves because they want to send their child to a particular kind of school. So I think education is something which is multi-layered in context of institutional structures within it. So if somebody is living in Delhi, they have the possibility of sending their children to public schools, which are run by the Delhi government. They can also send their children to private schools, and there's a range of private schools which goes from one kind of resourcefulness to another kind of resourcefulness, to brands in private schools, to kind of local identities in private schools. So private school is not a very singular kind of identity. It's a spread. It's a spectrum of things that you're going on. But what attracts people to private school is the idea of medium of instruction. So in private school, the medium of instruction will always be English. Whereas in public schools, it's like it's Hindi, and then gradually you're picking that up. There's a third category of schools here, which are international schools. Okay, now these international schools have an absolutely different mandate, and they have an absolutely different kind of socio-cultural environment. And of course, the opportunities, the world that you enter to when you get into an international school or something like that. Within the same school, you may have students who are going, this will be in private schools. You may have students going in grade 11th and 12th. You may have students going for CBSE board. You may have students going for international baccalaureate. So what I'm trying to say is, that the layers are so close to each other that they might look like a thin sheet, but if you microscopically look at it, you realize that it is a multi-layered kind of a community where we are living in. Yeah? Um, and I'll quote an example here, which is derived from one of my projects that I was doing with UGC one point of time. So I was just trying to figure out that how women is placed in science, that was the kind of place over there. So we were visiting the schools, and we went to one of the girls' school, which was run by public, which is a public school. Which was the girls' school. And so we started having this conversation with the girls over there. The girls said that, do you ever feel any kind of, disadvantage? Because obviously, when the girls are coming to school, we can't say that they're discriminated. We'll say that, do you ever feel any kind of disadvantage because of your gender identity? And the girls over there said, no, we don't feel any kind of disadvantage. I said, well, that's great. And apparently their siblings, the men's siblings, the boy siblings were also studying in public schools. So there was no discrimination between that. The boys were sent to another kind of schools, girls were sent to another kind of schools. So I said, can you further exemplify this in terms of resources and all that? So, they very categorically said that the resources are equally distributed between me and my brother. Say, let's assume there are two of them, So if my father wants to spend 10 rupees, he keeps 10 rupees for the children. 5 will be for me, 5 will be for my brother. And, I was really getting very hopeful in this conversation that, wow, I'm going to come out with something very exciting over here, and the society is changing and all that. I said, wow, that's great. So then I said, and how is this money used? So she said, the money that is kept for me will be used for my marriage, and the money which is kept for my brother will be used for his education. So now this was a very interesting point of reflection for me, that how we are made to understand the idea of social justice. Because somewhere down the line, it is connected. I'm comfortable. I have equal access to resources, but I don't have equal access to opportunities. So what happens to my life, how my adulthood is seen in the larger context, in a societal context, it requires a reflection. And when I'm not able to do that, I think that is a kind of, gap which is coming up at that point. So it's something which is very, very, very complicated, is what I want to say. That layering and that multidimensionality and all those kind of things. Yeah.
Yes, very interesting remarks. I think we'll revisit this idea of accessibility to different types of education, because that is a very interesting piece. And as you mentioned, there's multiple layers, but I would also say there are multiple layers in terms of power and privilege that nuance people's experiences, right? I'm sure you agree. I can. The second part of that question, though, I'm just going to focus in on for a second. It asks for how you understand it as a senior faculty member. Has your understanding of social justice changed? Are you able to speak more openly about social justice, given your many years of experience and your research and your leadership opportunities? Or do you think that it's, could you comment on that component of question one, please?
That's a very interesting point to talk about. So I go for the first part of the discussion. Yes, I've seen social justice. I've seen you are also experiencing. If you have not had any disadvantage in your upbringing, it takes time to understand the idea of social justice. That's what I felt. I don't know how correct is that, but I felt that, that you need to kind of be a part of it to understand. So my entire journey of my education, whether it was school education or it was college education and then my doctoral position, at that time, there was little discussion about social justice. And there must be a discussion happening, but I should say there was little action happening on that front. So my classrooms were always very homogeneous. You see that accessibility issues started barging in the conversation in the policy perspective at a much later stage in 90s and then 80s and late 90s and things like that. So social identities were not very discreetly spoken about when I was a part of the education system as a student or as a doctoral student. It's my connection when I started working in a school. So I worked in a school for 4 years after completing my bachelor's and master's. Then I started understanding the kind of difference that we have had in the classroom, how children are different from each other. Then you attend PTM and you realize that, oh, parents are also different with each other. They might be the neighbors, both two families, but when they come to the classroom, when they want to talk about their child, their ideas about their child is absolutely different, the aspirations, the expectations that they have. So I think that is the point where it all started for me. So if you ask me, and then there are layers of my professional journey, which I've had working with children with special needs. So my journey started, my master's dissertation was in gifted. And then I moved over to, when I joined, I started working in the field of special education because we have had colleges where the programs for teaching children with special needs was done. And I become a part of, you know, um, those inspection committees and all that. So I started going and working over there. So the sensitization is coming to us also, or to me also, in its phases. So that entire journey from gifted to special needs, and then, then I come over to another juncture where now I'm talking about inclusion because I've started to start understanding the social aspect of it. You start understanding that it is not the educational institution which is discriminating, that discrimination is being flowing in from the community, from the policy, from all other places. So then you come at a larger understanding of social interaction and how, that society is interacting with the education system. So I started talking about inclusion. And this entire discussion on inclusion, which reflections about inclusion, that is where I started getting a little problematized because inclusion was always defined as mainstreaming, which became a problem for me. Because mainstreaming means I have to be, if I want to be included, I have to be something else. you know I have to have a language of some other kind. I have to have a dressing style of something of another kind. I have to have a food habits which I need to change. So a lot of idea of mainstreaming connected with the idea of losing my rootedness. And that is when I started understanding this idea. I started talking a lot about the idea of mainstreaming. I would not say I was opposing the idea of mainstreaming. Mainstreaming should be for opportunities. Everybody should have mainstreamed opportunities. But for those opportunities, it should not be important that I change myself as an individual. So when you demand change, you're talking about an already decided societal structure where everybody will be cloned into social practices, which is a problem. That is where I started talking about. So I said, along with mainstreaming, one has to talk about diversity. So there is a movement that I have had in my experiential journey. And I'm happy that I've got so many years to kind of work on and be on those junctures and the kind of reflections that I could come up with. So then I realized that, okay, so what is missing is an appreciation for diversity. If somebody comes to me and something like a language, I'll give you an interesting example here. And this is one of my favorite examples because language is one of the things which is very prevalent in India. We've had this boy who came to me for a bachelor's program, and this boy had done his undergrad program in a Hindi belt state. I want to keep it as anonymous as possible. He just came from one of the Hindi belt states, and he has completed his graduation in physics in Hindi medium. He came to one of the central universities to do his master's. And this is a purely English medium study university where this boy came in for his master's in physics. So there was something going on in the classroom, and This boy just got up and started talking about or discussing that concept in Hindi. And that's where he came from. And there was a sudden, everybody bursted into laughter listening to him speak that kind of a language, because he was not speaking English with an colloquial flavor. He was actually speaking Hindi, which was in that particular institution. Thankfully, the professor was very inclusive, let me use the word. And the professor concentrated on the idea that the student was trying to say rather than, the medium in which he was trying to speak. And so this happened. This boy then gradually he came to us, he did his bachelor's, then he did his uh, PhD in physics, and gradually then he's now working in different internationally in Japan and Germany for different projects which are related with physics. So what I'm trying to say is that that boy had the resilience to kind of combat the kind of discrimination that he felt in that scenario. But supposing there are many who do not come with that strong self-concept about their rootedness, these are the people who can be easily out of the system. And that is what is something which we need to be exceptionally careful about. So when we are talking about the system, when we are talking about it from the point of view of students and the faculty being there, I think it's important for us to understand that how this social interaction is playing with, and what kind of life skills do the children, do the students come to, or the people come to in a scenario. So that's one of the very, very critical points, I think. Yeah.
Okay, well, thank you. I think you've given a lot of insights. Some of them will blend really nicely into the next question. So we'll just move to the next question if that's okay,
Sure.
Dr. Saxena. Number 2 is, what, if any, are the social justice issues you have encountered in your area of expertise? And you've listed the language level of discrimination that you've come across. Do you have like 2 others that you would really identify as key in your area of education?
See, there are multiple aspects, and then there are intersectionality across them, which will be there. Disability is another very important factor of discrimination. And I would say that your social identity is another important part of, is another factor of discrimination. I think all others, for example, if I want to take disability and your social positioning, I would like to put gender, class under that as an intersectionality, right? So if you come from a disadvantaged social community, and you are a woman, and you are a woman with disability, and you are a women with disability in from a poorer background, these are the levels of it. So I would like to take them as subcategories, because they exist all over, and they add to they multiply, rather not add, they multiply the issues of related with discrimination, and of course then social justice that we're talking about. Here also, I think I'll give you another example, because that will help us understand the situation better. So I was in a convention where, it was related to one of the social groups, which is apparently disadvantaged. And in this particular place, these people were like, they were children also, they were NGO workers, they were office people, the governance guys, and, people like me who came from education. There is this idea which a child narrated a story of discrimination, where we said that he needed an identity card for some purpose, but the teacher, who was from a privileged background, she was not issuing him the card, that identity card, and how the child has to go back and fight for it and do all those kind of issues that we're talking about. And this was not something in Delhi that we're talking about. This was some, far remote area in one of the states that where the child came from. Now, in the second scenario, we have people who are empowered. We have people who have gained position belonging to the similar community structure. But when they come to the system, they come to the system with an idea to rule, with an idea to kind of use that power and positioning to undo or to kind of, to kind of displace others around them. So in both the cases, in one case, the child is underprivileged, and there is a privileged person who is trying to control the mechanism. In the other scenario, there is a person with underprivileged background, but now as a position of respect and as a position of uh, I should say, in a routine system, in a official system, you have a hold on the strong positioning in that professional sphere. But both of them are doing the same thing, that is using power to dismiss the existence of others. So that is where I want to say that there are processes, which are associated with the position, and people are not willing to negotiate them. My journey is seen as reaching that position of power and then get on to control. And whoever reaches that position of power is kind of, is they get into control mechanism. And that is how the process of social justice, it fails itself. Because the idea is that if you reach a position of authority where you can now take decisions, where you can now be, where you can now modify the institutional ethos, where you can work towards that. Instead of that, you start working to get the control. So the control becomes a primary reason for me to be at a position, rather than understanding the whole journey and making sure that others who are in that beginning stage, they do not, their journeys are different, their journeys are more empowering, their journeys are more, the institutions are prepared to accept that kind of a thing. So social justice is a collective responsibility. Social justice cannot be seen as achieving a point of power and then replicating the behaviors which are associated with that power position, that is control. So how do I learn to become or to create that environment of empowerment is something which is extremely important. In another example, I'll tell you, this is just a kind of counter example to what I'm saying. I know of incidents where a person with disability was extremely inappropriately targeted. Okay. Now, this is happening in a statutory body. This is happening in a university statutory body. And everybody is trying to kind of, after the incident, people came to this person and they said that you can file a complaint under the People with Disability Act because, that is your power. And this person simply refuses. He said, what has happened to me is because of the task, the work that I'm doing. It has not happened to me because of my disability. The Disability Act is for people who are who are impacted because of their identity, their positioning as a person with disability. But here that has not happened. So I would not like to pitch this. I would not like to demean the act that is there for people with disability and try to just use my positioning to kind of mix issues and to kind of just not be able to take a clear stand. So I think that kind of demarcated understanding of self and professional is also extremely important. And when I gave this example, why I gave this example is because this is what I'm talking about, reaching a place of decision making. When you reach a place of decision making, how are your decisions governed is something which is extremely important. You might have come to that place with a position of privilege. You might have come from with a socially disadvantage, with any kind of disadvantage, not only social, it can be any other kind of disadvantage. But when you have to take a decision, how your core values help you understand and take you ahead. Do you want to create a conflict, or do you want to create a harmony? I think those are very minute junctures which we need to understand. So how differences gets converted to disagreements, and then how these disagreements gets converted to conflict is something which is important. So that journey from differences to disagreements to conflict is something which is a very typical point, and which is really really defining our positionality in that context of social justice.
Okay, so I think you've answered question 2 with your more nuanced understanding of a intersectional identity and how people have multiple layers, and they are coming with all of those layers, and we must think about the flow of power and privilege in the decision-making process when they attain positions of power. And I think that you're spot on that there is something to say about how power is used once it's obtained. But I would say that there might be a space to think that there's a gray area between people who misuse the power for control or people who use the power in some generative way. There are a lot of shades of gray in between, because within, as you well know, within institutions and different management organizations and structures of society, power is never a direct thing that someone can easily just move in any direction they want. There are a number of different situations that you must think about when it comes to taking decisions, whether it is the other senior leaders in the room, or whether it is about the implications of your decision, or whether it's around the safety of you being able to make that decision, or your vulnerability in stating a statement that might be seen as inflammatory or controversial, given the political stance of the nation or the political stance of the institution or for the company that one works for. So I do think like you're right on point for the intersectionality and acknowledging how intersectionality needs to be weaved in with an understanding of power and privilege. But there are also nuances and complexities in how that's even understood, right?
Absolutely.
So I think your examples really speak to that. So thank you for sharing 2 great examples.
I'll take a minute to kind of have a
Sure.
to take your comment ahead. It's really, that is why I've been saying right from the beginning that it's a very complex preposition that we're talking about. And power is something which is, sometimes our behaviors or our actions emerge because we feel powerless. Yeah. So the thing that you're trying to say, we feel powerless because we are not able to do what we want to do in a system. Now I'm talking in a formal system. We're not able to do what we want to do. So how do I understand? I means anybody understand that idea of powerlessness is also something very important. Because if in a situation I'm feeling powerless, if I'm thinking that whatever ideas I'm giving, and purpose could be any. Purpose is important, but let's just not talk about purpose at this moment. Let's talk about action. What do I do with that powerlessness? The feeling of that powerlessness is extremely important. Do I find an opportune moment to be able to talk about it and to bring in academically, or do I become disproportionately aggressive and try to harm other person's dignity because I think somebody is in the position of leadership? So they are going ahead, because anybody who's in the position of leadership is privileged, irrespective of what is their social identity. So being in the position of leadership is a privilege by itself, apart from your individual identity. Now, at that point of time, if at that juncture, when I feel powerless, what do I do at that point of time? Do I start getting into a personalized attack mechanism? Or do I find out that, okay, there is a situation where currently I'm not able to do something, so there is a kind of, uh, it leads me to certain kind of difficult moments. I'm feeling sidelined. Sidelined is not equal to marginalized, you know. We need to understand these are two different words, and so they're coming for different reasons. So what do you do in that situation when we are feeling sidelined is also very important. I think we will talk about microaggression in time to come. So I'm just trying to connect the 2 points and trying to say that disagreements and this feeling of powerlessness because the things are not going the way they should go, this is another complex relationship. And how I enact at that point of time is of extreme importance. Not only for the system, it's also for my professional, for me establishing myself as a professional. So that's very important. Yeah.
That's a very helpful explanation. Thank you for that added comment. So we'll move to question 3 because it starts to talk about how we can build that awareness. So question 3 is, what are some social justice initiatives that are occurring in your discipline to help build awareness and or address social justice issues, like all the ones that we've been speaking about? So if you could name at least 3, that would be wonderful.
Yeah, I think we need to start with the policy perspectives. We need to start with the school education and the policy perspectives. And they play my understanding of policy perspective is that they play a lot of role in coming up to some kind of, you know, in redefining the structures at that place. I'll take a small example. 1986, we have had a education policy in India. And the young prime minister at that point of time was very keen on introducing computers in the system of education. So 1986, we had a policy which had a lot of focus on computer and all those kind of things. So what happens is once you have that, your funding gets directed, your policies, your implementation structures become little different. So that policy which came in 1986 was of extreme importance to where the country stands at this moment in the field of technology. You know, it takes time for the policy to kind of respond and to kind of show that impact of maturity. So everyone knows about the way India has grown and the kind of technology experts India is providing to all the people globally, you know. And I think that credit goes to that 1986 policy. So policy is located in that contemporary scenario and the foresight of the policy planners. Similarly, we have had this policy of which is National Education Policy 2020. This is another policy which has just come 4 years ago. This talks about all these ideas of rootedness, which is something that we were talking about, which is something which I said that needs to be an important part when we're talking about mainstreaming, how these two counter each other. It's an important point. This policy talks about, I go back to language. This policy talks about respecting local language. The policy talks about, in the context of language, the policy talks about having primary education in one's native language, which is not an easy thing to do because every language does not have a script. They may not have a vocabulary. So there are challenges to that. But somewhere down the line, if we talk about the 22 8 scheduled languages, which are mature enough, which have a structure and a syntax, I think these languages will eventually get promoted. So that as a policy is one thing which is important for me, you know, talking about socially and educationally disadvantaged zones. So if there are those zones, there is going to be more funding, identifying those zones and making, efforts to create educational systems over there. I think these are very important parts of that thing. So one, I think, is policy, and there are enough placements around that. And I would also like to say the kind of difficulty that people may have, because this connects to the earlier part that we are talking about. Policy will require a time to show its impact. Like the policy which came in 1986 came with a vision, and that vision really benefited the entire community in India, about the technology interventions and other places, of course. But at the same time, if this policy is given a time, they would be able to show the impact on the structures. The vision will get translated into that. But if something because education is always connected with the political ideology, with the governance and things like that. We know that there's a lot of connection between state and education. We don't have to talk a lot about it. Like, it is one of the starting points of our arguments now these days. So, like something happened in 2000. There was a one party government which came up with a curriculum framework. And the moment in 2005, the other government came, they came up with another curriculum framework, 2005. So that movement, what is happening in that, when they are establishing your ideological differences are being settled in the field of education, it becomes a lot of challenge for the practitioners who are there in that field. A lot of attention is wasted onto that. So this kind of a mature understanding that how do we let the system continue despite the fact there's a change of political ideology is also very important for us to understand that how that effort is sustained, because sustainability becomes a challenge. So this is one point of policy which is important as a change maker, but also how the policy may be, it may not be given enough opportunity to be able to do that. That's one thing which is important. The second important thing which has happened is community sensitization. Community sensitization is like, there are a lot of movements, like, for example, now that I've had a global experience, I will not say that gender issues only limited to India or the communities in India. I completely have episodes to share to say that it's a global phenomenon. So when we're talking about these community sensitization program, I think that has become one of the very important part of this. Movements like selfie with your daughter. Okay, that was just a movement. And the parents, especially the fathers, if somebody understand Indian society, fathers clicking a selfie with their daughter and posting it, it became a big kind of a change maker, because that meant that I am with my daughter. I mean, if I was analyzing it, I stand by my daughter, and I stand by my daughter being in public spaces, which is something which has been a very a big question mark for the women in India. So I think those are smaller movements of community sensitization. I'm just kind of giving you snapshots of the kind of things which I'm referring to is important. Reserving spaces. So Panchayat is a local governing body in India, which is village based. Reserving positions in Panchayat for women was a very interesting episode. We now have reservation for women in the parliament. So the next election that will come in 2029, by then this whole thing will be worked out, and we expect to have that reservation being there over in that particular place. So these are the kind of community initiatives is something which is of extreme importance. The third part, if we want to talk about, is how the purpose of individual lives are being redefined. Yeah. So creating those enabled individuals, that has become a very important part. So in schools, for example, now the counselors are essential. Every school has to have a counselor. So enabling individuals is another effort that is being made. So social justice initiatives, I think it will be, I'll just quickly put it in three kind of, spaces. One is the policy, second is community, and third is individual. And there are, proactive actions in those spaces to come up with a more just society in the future. Yeah.
Wonderful. It sounds like there's a lot of great initiatives that are happening to address all the social justice issues that you're speaking. It's wonderful to see that some of the same things that are happening in Canada in terms of trying to address some of the similar social justice issues, as you rightfully called out. These are global issues. So policy development, policy making is a big proponent as well here in Canada. Same with community and understanding the role that community plays in social justice advancements. And this last piece on individuals, I think we'll touch on it a little bit more in the next question, so I'm going to leave it. But I think it's very fascinating to see, and hear you speak and draw some parallels to what's happening here in terms of the scope of social justice education in, in Canada, especially within British Columbia and Ontario, which are known to be, forward with their progressive curriculums and their policies and involvement with community grassroots initiatives. Yeah. Okay, so we'll move to question 4. Also, in the interest of time, I want to be mindful of your time.
Yeah.
Number 4 is, how do you respond to microaggressions or forms of discrimination, if any, that you have experienced?
Well, this was one of the most difficult questions for me, Dr. Sharma, because you come from physics and you're like, oh, this is the inertia you're talking about. My bus is not working. How can I kind of, how do I get help to get the bus moving? I have to come out of it and I have to do that. The problem here is that there are no examples that exist. If I talk about myself, the way I would want it to be resolved, there are people who are still very comfortable with the idea of mainstreaming. They are not problematized by the idea of mainstreaming. So there are no examples that pre-exist for a person like me. And that is where there's a lot of self-counseling and self-reliance and a kind of reflection which we are getting into every time something happens. And when something is happening, you also need to be out of that. You also need to move out of that position and being in a place where you are able to reflect upon more rationally in that situation. So these have been the challenges over there. But I think I have had experiences of microaggression and major aggressions, aggressions in the major sense. And my core values that I have acquired over the years that have helped me deal with them. So there is something called a difference. The difference is getting converted into disagreement. The disagreement is now coming to a position of conflict. Conflict leading to aggression is a possibility. That is how I look at it. And that is what I have felt in the situations also. So situations can be very challenging from that point of view. But once, if you're taking decisions in that aggression, in that situation, it might be a little problematic because you're not in your safe and sound state of mind. So what happens to you when you move out of that situation? So for somebody like me, I will, within that moment, I will detach myself from a situation for a while. It may be momentary. It may be 30 seconds. Because every time you don't have a lot of time to respond to that particular situation. So if you ask me, I will detach myself at that particular minute. I have learned to kind of understand that when the conflict is leading to aggression, I have learned to understand that journey. I'm not an expert onto that. I may lose at certain point of time. That's how I'm understanding the whole thing to be, that I've learned to understand those spaces and very carefully maneuvering my journey from conflict to aggression. That is something which I am trying to do in my own practices, as we say that. So that's something I think which I have tried. It has worked. And in those moments of pulling back, you get into a quick reflective mode, and you also understand that, and then you're guided by your core values. That is what I'm trying to say. Whether you want this conflict to extend to a personalized situation, because aggression will then be personalized. Aggression is not something that is now a social structure or a systemic structure or something like that. Conflict is systemic, but aggression is personalized now. So when I'm in a system, how do I behave as an individual is my responsibility. So those drawbacks, that are the moments where you are governed. You're quickly, okay, if you do this, it goes into aggression. If you don't do this, it stays as a conflict. You're not resolving the conflict, but you're not becoming aggressive. So every time during those small junctures, it's not possible to resolve the conflict. The idea is not to resolve at that particular moment, but the idea is to restrain from moving into a aggressive zone. That is when I'm in the situation. And of course, when you get out of the situation, you need to kind of list out everything that has happened, either on a piece of paper, sometimes on a piece of paper, yes. And then you try to find gaps. Where did I go wrong? Could I have done something at point number 4 that the point number 10 would not have come? So those kind of things which are continuous behavioral, modifications for yourself, that is something which is there. And then again, I would say the purpose of your being is very important. If the purpose of your being is to hold a position of power and have that authority, you will think differently. But if the purpose of your own being is be to be empowered, to be able to deal with differences, to be able to respect diversity, then your mechanism will be very, very different. So there are in situation behaviors and there are out of situation behaviors which have helped me deal with this idea and working on um, my own behavior patterns related with aggression and dealing with aggression of other people that I have faced.
Okay, wonderful. I'm just going to ask for a brief example if you don't mind sharing. If you don't want to share, you've offered a really great explanation. So that's helpful for me and our listeners to understand how you understand microaggressions and macroaggressions and the whole process that, is kind of cyclical when you do enter into those spaces. So if you would like to share an example that would help exemplify this to the listeners, or we can continue on to question number 5. What do you think?
Okay, so I'll share I'll share the example very briefly, and obviously when I'm sharing it, the people who are associated with it will be able to understand because it has happened in a public space, which is an official kind of a thing, where office space rather, which was where public was present, is something like that. Uh, so we were getting onto some kind of a work which was happening in that particular forum. I was convening that activity, and there were difference of opinions about that activity. We just got converted into that difference to disagreement. Disagreement stuck. We were very decent in conversations. Then it became a conflict. Because now the conflict, the moment I have an understanding, the moment the disagreements convert to conflict, now we are moving away from the possibility of our dialogue. Disagreements is something where we can dialogue. But when we are taking it to a position of conflict, the other outside agency mandates are dropping in now. So the moment it got converted to conflict, now the kind of words that are coming up are very different, because they are not related to the situation. They are related to something, some kind of an agenda which you are there for, which people have come with. Now that thing happens, and then, it just takes a very sweeping form of aggression. And so that was terrible for me, because I couldn't understand that why that things have moved to that tangent which were never meant to be. So we are in a system, you are kind of trying to do a work, and when you're doing that work, you have completely immersed in that work for 7-8 months, day in and day out, and you are not doing, this is not your own project, this is something which is the system wherein you're working, and it's a institutional work that you're doing, and this has just got converted into this. I think that was a very baffling moment for me. That is the point which I want to use at that point of time. Everything just went on for a little while. We concluded the work, and then there was kind of when you move out of the room, you should be more human and you should be more reflective. But again, what I reflect upon and how my reflection gets portrayed is something which is important for us to understand. And that again, I think would be based on the purpose for me being there in that place. So, there was some kind of communications, public communications over email and things like that, which happened at that point of time, which was extremely disturbing for me because this was something, you're sending an email without a context. So it is not helping the others to understand what is happening in that situation. And a lot of your colleagues then drop in, they try to kind of counsel you, they try to tell you, you do this, you can write back this email, you can do that. And it was a difficult night for me, I should say. But then, early morning, I had this insight. I said, there is a problem with somebody. There's a kind of an emotional trauma that this person is going through. Whether I intended for it or not is a separate question right now. So I was able to separate out two questions out of it. One, whether I had an intention or I meant how it, to which direction it went to, that was one question. And the second question was how the other person has understood the entire situation to be, or or how that reflection is coming from that other person. And I felt at that point of time that I need to be responding to this email, apologizing for the kind of, if this other person has felt hurt. You don't understand people's trigger. You don't understand what can be problematic for people, because you're not in your family. You can't understand people's triggers. So how can we be sure that in a formal situation where we don't interact with people so often, we'll understand that? So I just felt that responsibility, and on that public forum, I said that this was not the intention, but still, if I have heard, I apologize, and I seek forgiveness from this person. This is one of the examples. I might have gone wrong into it, but this is one way which I've dealt with one of the situations. I'm still in a reflective mode. I'm still trying to understand that where I could have been more careful at that particular point of time. While I'm absolutely, extremely, and absolutely sure that I did not mean the tangent where it went to. So even when you're sure of your own intentions, sometimes your social requirements are different, and how you deal with that social requirement is a matter of your core values. That is where I say, so if you don't want conflict, let us do something where the conflict where the conflict can be minimized, even when you are not resolving the conflict. So that movement from conflict to aggression is a journey which can be dealt with when we are reflecting in those modes. I don't know if that helps, but
Yes, no, it does. And I think really understanding that sometimes when conflict is not resolved, it might be a better space to leave it. Often this occurs in social justice conversations as well, right? When we have controversial topics, you can take your pick at this point. There's so many global conflicts around the world. You bring them into an educational setting, and many different opinions and thoughts and interpretations and perspectives that are informed by people's lived experience and core values and beliefs bring forth all kinds of statements. And it's really learning how to navigate in those spaces that is part of the richness that comes with trying to explore and understand social justice issues. So I think, you've done a beautiful job in sharing the insights in terms of understanding conflict, disagreement, and aggression. It's a very helpful explanation that you've provided. So thank you. So we'll move to question 5, Dr. Saxena, if that's okay. Number 5 is, where do you turn to for inspiration/support when dealing with structural/policy inequities that you face in your field?
I would say my students and my researchers. Because that's a zone where those are the people who are willing to explore nuanced understanding of the issues that we're talking about. So one is definitely a very impartial and rational kind of implementation of policies, which is important because you're talking about the institutional structures. That how do we go ahead with that? So I think as far as the institutional structures are concerned, it's important that both of these, how I respond to the requirements of the institution is very rationalized, and my approach is unbiased, and I'm not judging people onto that. That is one part of the conversation, definitely my personal being. The second part is as somebody who is in the position of leadership at times for certain projects, which is important. So how we kind of always continuously reflect upon if this happens, what can be the outcome? So, sometimes I'll just throw a question open to different groups of people. These could be my institutional people, but sometimes, they could be friends, they could be family. I'll just throw them open. This happens, and if somebody is doing this, then how do you respond to it? Do you think it will be discriminatory for somebody? Do you think certain people will be out of the setup when we talk about these or these kind of interventions and things like that? So maximizing the partnerships and participation is something which is another thing which I would do when I am at the part of leadership, and listening to people. And I've also learned to be more patient over the time, because when you want to listen to the people, you just listen to them. You listen to them unconditionally. You're not listening at that moment to and drafting your reply for it. That's another skill which I have started learning in the last 5 years or so, that you're not listening to respond, you're listening to listen. Those things are very important when you're sitting at the position of decision making. Now, those decisions can be smaller ones, like your student writing a term paper, or those decisions can be bigger ones, where you are doing something for the system as such. So that is something which I have learned, and I'm kind of working on, and I think it has helped me being more rational in my approach. And then the third one is, of course, through my writings, readings, the conversations that I'm having with you, and the research that I'm doing with my scholars, the smaller term papers, the kind of space that we provide. So I do this course on inclusion and diversity and inclusion, and placing it in the context of school and pedagogy. And there are these students, the master level students, when they offer this specialization, they have to do a term paper, and they're doing fantastic term papers, because I tell them that you'll have to do a term paper from your own experience, something that you feel has been a matter of exclusion or has been a matter of inclusion. You can pick up either of them. I'm not trying to establish that the world is full of exclusionary practices and the people are not getting their due. You don't want to do that. And people come up with very interesting things. For example, I'll just give you one of the examples. This girl who was in my class, she wanted to do something, and then there was this unfortunate incident in her family that she lost one of her grandparents. So she visited her native place. It was after a long time she visited her native place, and since she was the direct family, she had to stay there for the entire rituals of which are there. And in India, we have this long range of rituals after the post-death rituals. She came back from that. She came back almost after 15 days. She joined classes. And she said, I want to change my term paper. And I was like, what do you want to do? She said, I want to understand that what is the role of women in the last rite in different communities. And I think that was something which was very critical for me to say that, okay, you're interested in something like this. But I was like, yeah, go ahead. Let's try to learn. We will all learn this. This will be a learning experience. So she felt some discrimination in her in that community, and then she felt that, oh, women is just out of the rituals, the men are doing it. And she was also looking at it that the men has also lost a very dear person. How the men is supposed to be so quiet and calm and not letting the emotions come out during those duration, how the men negotiate with their emotions because they're doing all the rituals in there. So I think those are the kind of spaces where their experiences gets converted into their thought processes. They try to reflect upon, they collect data, they work on it. So that is something which also keeps us very deeply connected to the micro realities of the communities and the lived experiences of the people. So that third part is of extreme importance, definitely. And I've also had a group of people with me, very interesting colleagues with whom we continuously discuss, we disagree over a cup of coffee. And every time we have those kind of discussions, these leave us more informed and more infected to think beyond what you're thinking. So challenging your own level of thought is another important thing. How do you do that? And I think these discussions with your colleagues has been it has been a very important part of my journey, as I would want to say. Yeah.
That's wonderful that you draw so much inspiration and support from so many different communities, I'm going to call them, like your colleagues, your family, your research assistants, your students. It seems just absolutely lovely to hear that you have such a wide network of support and inspiration to draw upon.
Yes.
That's sometimes a big challenge when you do social justice work here in Canada, as a racialized person, because we have a different form of discrimination. Here there is racism, and even if you are in a leadership role, sometimes it's very difficult to be supported because you're one of the very few people, especially with the intersectionality of gender and race and ethnicity. Sometimes that becomes a really big challenge. And so it's lovely to hear that in Delhi, there is no shortage of support and inspiration for such progressive and honest, open and bold conversations. So really appreciate you sharing those different communities of support and inspiration for yourself. Okay.
Yeah, I'll just add a little, sorry,
Sure.
Sharma, I'll just add a little, these communities have to be created.
Oh, of course.
The support communities have to be created. So if today I am enriched with that kind of support system, I think this has also been a very gradual process. And this is again being, I would always say that there are disagreements. When we are in a community, this is the community, the whatever community we have, I am, what are the kind of people I'm surrounded by right now? There is no compulsion to agree to each other. We constantly challenge each other, whether it is my colleagues or it is a group of students, or it is any other committee members. And when we were working in a committee, where you are willing to disagree, that disagreement is always there. But despite that, when you're working on those nuances of conflict and aggression, you are able to create these communities where your own positioning is respected, because you are also respecting that entire idea of others. So my behavior with my significant others is also of an extreme importance when we are talking about this, right? And that is where, when everybody asks me that in one line you have to talk about this, that what is the final message you want to have? I don't know whether we are concluding, but I'm just saying it like that. But I said unconditional mutual respect for each other is something that for me is a core value, which I am trying to kind of, inculcate within myself. So for my purpose of life is to be able to unconditionally respect everyone, whoever I come in contact with. You start with human, and then you go over to trees and to animals and to other species also, depending upon your level of sensitization towards different components in your surroundings. So for me, my motto is unconditional respect for each other. How do we work about that? That is the mission I'm on at this moment.
That's absolutely beautiful, Dr. Saxena. What a wonderful way of speaking to your core values. And it's interesting because, in Canada, one of the areas of social justice education that is a contemporary sort of piece that's in and out of our newspaper is around Indigenous peoples and their rights to land and their connection to land and land ownership. So these pieces around being respectful and what that means is actually something that has been reinforced through revisiting the issues around understanding Indigenous peoples and their communities and their lands. And so it's lovely to hear that those are shared values in India as well. So that's a really nice connection. So thanks for sharing that. So we'll move to the very last question. I apologize, we've gone a little over in terms of the time, but if you're okay, we'll continue to the last question. Are you okay for
Sure.
time?
Yeah,
Okay.
sure.
So question number 6 is, what are some possibilities / recommendations that you have to help promote social justice education in your discipline?
When I read this question, I thought about it, and I think we need to be creating toolkits for people, you know. I mean, it might sound that, you are talking the UNESCO language, that for everything you create a toolkit. But I have genuinely felt that people don't know what to do. They really have no clue. They have not seen any alternative action patterns when confronted in a particular situation. So, how do we kind of create those life skills is something which is important. And I said, as I said in the beginning of my conversation, that these life skills are needed for everybody, whether they have had the privilege or whether they come from a disadvantage, with some disadvantage to a particular system. I think that is something which is of extreme importance. Another important thing that I feel, so that toolkit will mean that we identify certain life skills, certain thought processes, and how do we kind of work ahead and move on to this? So this is something which I'm mulling over in the last 2 years. That how do we do that? Because my experience during my Fulbright, I was placed in South of America, and I was at Mississippi, right at the center of civil rights movement. I could see that inbuilt. I should use the word aggression, because the kind of exploitation has been for so many years, and that issue is still very relevant. And even at the position of power, even when you are in the position of authority, decision making is what I want to use. The other two words are rather not relevant here. uh, Even when you are in a position of decision making, you cannot make independent decisions. So that is something which I felt over there. So I realized that there has to be a toolkit of some kind where people learn what to do in this particular situation. We may not have a matter ready for this right now. We may have to think about, we may have to analyze the podcast that you're doing and come up with certain kind of life skills that are important for us to inculcate, But that is one thing which I definitely see happening and important in this context. The other thing I have thought about is multi-age discussion forums. I've felt that there's a lot of resistance to talk to people across age groups. Something that we have had in India, we have had this tradition of big joint families. And those big joint families will have people of all age groups within them, right? So something which is happening, whatever is happening in the family, it's the opinions of people are dropping in, you know. But one of the disadvantages in those family structures could have been that um, the younger people are always seen as uninformed. They don't know what to do. And this younger person need not be 12 years or 5 years. This younger person can be 35 years and 40 years also, because there are people who are older to you who can take decisions on your behalf, who have more wisdom. So collective wisdom with age is a problem for me, because you have not seen contemporary scenarios. So these open-minded discussions forums where multi-age people are sitting together to listen to listen. I think that can be very important for all of us to talk about, because certain patterns of socially unjust practices, they run across the years, hundreds of years. Now, those hundreds of years, if you have a person who is sitting in those conversations, somebody who is 80 years old and somebody who is 10 years old, and they are communicating, and there are people from all age groups in that particular discussion forum, people will we'll have to, and people justify their behavior over there. There can be a lot of understanding about, so this is where you're justifying, this is your rationale for your behavior. Probably it has to change because 2024, we are in a different position altogether. So those ideas of, sharing of narratives is very important. And it is important for the young age also. I'm not trying to say that the young age need not take, because those experiential journeys are very, very important. Like I just spoke about 1986 policy. It had a mandate, it gave a vision to the country, and how that vision got multiplied into the strength building within the country is important. So that age is also important, and that because you have seen something happening, and then over the year period, what happened to that, how it changed the world and the people within themselves, or did not change. I think that is important. So the second point which I want to say is that particular thing, which is of extreme importance. And of course, the third thing that I want to say is about educational institutions and their ethos. Education should provide an alternative way to think. If education is not taking that responsibility, then education is also becoming an agent to propagating the existing forms of unjust patterns. So when communities are kind of, reflecting upon themselves, wow, great. But education is an organized effort, and education should have a should take the prime responsibility of bringing, bringing to the complete consciousness of the people that how we live with each other in a given context. And that living with each other can be your classroom, it can be your drawing room of your house, it can be, the playground, it can be any place where you are. How I conduct myself is, I need to learn that. And if the institutions have that as one of the objectives, they will have institutional ethos like that. They will have personal trainings like that, where, because a lot of it is happening through observation also. So if I want students in the educational institute to learn to be more inclusive in their approach, to respect diversity, this has to be a culture in the institution. The teachers, the support staff in the institution will have to be trained. That is where I'm saying multi-age discussions. So it is all connected with each other. Those toolkits that I'm preparing, that we are planning to prepare, should be for college administrators, should be for college money, education institution administrators, other people, because everybody is impacting the situation in one or the other way. So these are a couple of points which came to my mind when I was thinking about that question, and of course, there can be more. Yeah.
Of course. But I think you offer some really wonderful recommendations in terms of intergenerational learning. That again brings back the Indigenous principles and also Indigenous communities across the world. Much like in India that you've spoken about, how there are families that have multiple age and multiple generations living together underneath one roof. There is a sense of richness in the dialogue and learning dynamic and opportunity if it is presented as such and understood as such. So I think that's wonderful, and toolkits to help people to how to navigate spaces, especially, for those who might not, coming full circle back to what we talked about, have that accessibility to education or different forms of education and different types of education. In India, it is important to have some level of shared ethical responsibility towards social justice matters, including how to coexist with one another harmoniously, regardless of the level of power, privilege, or oppression one is facing. But I do think you have to acknowledge those things first before you can get to a point of going to a point of living together harmoniously, because we see that all over the world right now, especially where there are wars that are ongoing, and it can be very challenging to not address the issues around power, privilege, oppression. before going into living harmoniously together, given the multifaceted identities in our world and the higher increasing levels of diversification, even within any individual characteristic or identity trait of a person. So thank you so very much, Dr. Saxena, for your wonderful insights and sharing these examples and thoughtful answers. Really appreciate your time. I apologize again because we went much longer, but it was a lovely discussion. It was very insightful. So thanks again for your time. Did you have any last comments that you want to share with our listeners before we conclude today?
Yeah, I think I want to say something with regard to the last observation that you've just shared. I've been to Russia recently to attend BRICS. So I represented India in one of the forums. So I think it's I understand because you've been to US, you've stayed there, you've been to Russia, you've been to other parts also. People are different than government. This is one thing which I really want to say as a closing comment, that people are different from the government. And we should never confuse people because of their country identities. At the end of the day, anybody who is living at any part of the world, everybody wants harmony. Everybody knows how to coexist. It's not something which we have not learned. We are so many people on this earth because we are not killing each other. Yeah. So one thing which I think is of acute importance, according to me, is that we are also able to learn to stop getting into the process of tokenism. You come from here, so you must be like that. So those existing forms of stereotypes, because of tokenism, I think they all need to be countered upon. Nationality is one of the very important parts when we talk about that. Also, because your podcast is in South of Asia, so that's a geographical location you have chosen out to be for reasons which are important to you. But what I'm trying to say is that idea of tokenism and the structured pre-existing stereotypes that needs to be negotiated. We all need to learn that kind of a thing. I also want to say that, and that this is how I start my master's course. The first unit is about understanding exclusion. Because if you don't understand exclusion, if you don't understand how deep rooted it is, you will never be able to get out of it. I'll take one more minute and then I want to give you one example here. I'm very tempted. So I visited as part of my NGO visit, one of the NGOs I was working with. We visited an area which was a little slum kind of an area. Okay. So all of us went for that visit in a car. And I was wearing a kurta at that point of time with the chunni. You understand that attire that we have. The moment I got off the car, now that is a slum I'm talking about. So obviously the conditions are not very fair. The moment I got off the car, I just took up my dupatta and I covered my face like this, right? Covering this and then covering my nose and my this entire part. I just covered it like this. I'm getting off covering, and by the time I shut the door of the car, I'm already reflecting. I said, these people are living here. Vandana, you have come to be with the people. By covering your nose and your mouth, what are you trying to convey? That these are not the conditions where you can stay. So you have the privilege of not staying in that context. That does not undermine the context of the people where they're living in. And within fraction of seconds, that dupatta was off my face and everything else like that. So I think these are the reflections you get. So how deep rooted your idea, your stereotypes, and your biased behaviors are, we don't understand them unless we get into a constant process of reflection. So that is something which is important for us to move on to. And of course, I want to say a lot of thanks Because every time such kind of conversations happened, I get an opportunity to consolidate my viewpoints and then move on to that. So thank you so much for the opportunity, and I look forward to this as a great resource for learning with each other. Thank you. Thank you so much.
We
Thank you,
have
Juliana. Thank you, Dr.
real
Sharma.
pleasure, and we really appreciate you taking the time to be with us. We also have learned a lot, and we're sure our listeners will learn a lot. So thank you very much, and we will keep you posted as our learning continues.
Yes, sure.
Thanks again.
Thank you.